The History Things podcast is brought to you by TR Historical, your one-stop shop for all your historical fan gear needs. Visit trhistorical.com and use the promo code HISTORYTHINGS to receive 10% off your next purchase. Thanks for listening. Now let's start the show.
Are you ready?
All right, welcome everybody to a special bonus episode of the History Things podcast. Here in the middle of quarter two, we wanted to keep the ball rolling in regards to our discussion about the Lincoln assassination, the Lincoln murder, as we discussed in our last episode. And today we have a very special guest. But first off, welcome back to the air there, Pat. How's it been?
It's been good, man. I'm very excited. Obviously, quarter two was a huge offering. Kobe Treadway, I'm a baseball guy. It's baseball season. He literally hit not just a home run, but a grand slam, chalking up almost 5 hours of just amazing content on the entire plot, the execution, no pun intended, but like the play out of that murder plot, things like that, the manhunt and all that. I'm excited to get back into it with him to talk about the aftermath,
right?
The trial and everything like that. But there's a unique story in the middle here, and I'm pumped for it. And why don't you tell us what we're here to talk about today, Matt?
Right. And because we kind of briefly went over it with Kobe, we wanted to dive in a little bit deeper today on the actual events of Ford's Theater itself. And so we've brought in one of our good friends that we know, actually we both know from the National Park Service side of things. We have Jana Friesen McCabe. She is formerly with Ford's Theater and is currently at the Monocacy National Battlefield as Chief of Interp and Visitor Services. So welcome to the show, Jana. Thank you very much for being with us here today and sharing your perspective and interp on Ford's Theater.
How you doing, Jana?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I'm excited.
Jana, again, we're all connected through Monocacy. Obviously, you ranger there, I ranger there, and Pat's one of our living history volunteers who's been there for several years at this point.
Super long time, coming up on a decade.
Really? 10 years?
Yeah, if we had a full season this year, this would have been my 10th season. So I guess last year doesn't count. So I guess we're just going into number 9. But this technically is my 10th year turning out at Monocacy whenever we get to do it.
Yeah, we'll let you burn some powder at some point. But we wanted to talk today about Ford's Theater.
So Ford's Theater is now managed as part of the National Mall and Memorial Parks. It's kind of in with a bunch of other parks. So I was there from about 2015 to 2019 with 3 years of that really focused at Ford's Theater and another site called Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument, which are kind of an odd pairing, but it works.
Sure.
Excellent. So were you working Ford's Theater then for the 150th?
I was not. I was not there for the 150th. So I came back east from Yosemite in August of 2015. So
so right after.
Yeah, I watched a lot of the 150th Ford's Theater programming on Facebook because they had done the visual over Facebook live. Mm-hmm. I had no idea at the time when I was watching it that that was going to be in my future. That was the farthest thing from my mind. I thought it was just a really interesting and poignant way to remember the assassination and just how, we look back and it's like, well, yeah, this happens at this time, this happens at that time. For them, it was just this ongoing, like, what's going to happen? Is he going to make it? Is he going to survive? Doctors know he's not going to make it, but the crowds outside are incredibly anxious. And so to get that, a little bit of that sense through their vigil was really powerful.
I was able to participate in that event as part of the living history community, and it was a very powerful evening to be there. And we stayed up all night and listened to the updates as they were being announced, and they did an hourly update similar to what was happening or had happened 150 years previously. It was a very moving event, probably one of the best that I've been at, to be perfectly honest, and was able to work with.
I love living history events like that, whereas the standard one, right, where we get the line infantry together or we do an artillery demo. And everybody knows it's weird for me to say because I love artillery.
You do.
Like, I love artillery. I mean, literally saying, K-shot, fire, you know, all that stuff. Like, that stuff gets you going. But doing the stuff at smaller sites like the Surratt House Museum in Clinton or like the cool, I guess the Vigil,
yep,
that was what it was, you know, those are cool things to watch. Things like that. So I didn't know that you were a part of that. That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, me and some of the guys from the 3rd went down, half of them doing civilian interp, and then I was just in my federal kit. And then there was also some folks wandering around as some folks that we know actually wandering around in Veteran Reserve Corps. So that was kind of neat too.
Love the VRC uniform. So what was it like, Jana, when you found out that this wasn't just this cool thing you were watching, that you were actually getting an opportunity to come east and work at this site?
So I didn't discover that for a couple more months. And again, even then I was going to the National Mall. So it was about a year and a half after that I realized that I was going to be more focused on working at Ford's Theater and Belmont Hall. So in retrospect, you know, I'm really glad that I watched it because I did end up working there. But, you know, regardless of that, you know, it was a great opportunity to just be a visitor. So often when you work for parks and for the Park Service, you never fully stop working when you go to park sites or to events. You're still kind of like, oh, I would do this, or, oh, they should have done that, or, oh.
Or I really want to use that at my site.
Yeah.
Exactly. Being across the country in California, in Yosemite, and watching that event, like, I could just be a visitor. I could just enjoy and appreciate the work that went into it and how it was coming together.
Yeah, I was going to say it was a great event all around, and they had a lot of moving pieces for that event outside of NPS too. There was a number of different organizations they were obviously partnering with to make that happen.
But you were working at a site at that time that was more geared towards, I guess, like natural resources, I guess, like the nature side of the Park Service's mission. And then,
yeah.
And then you got a chance to come and work in the historical side. That's awesome.
Well, I was working in Yosemite National Park, and there is, oddly enough, a really strong Lincoln connection to Yosemite.
Oh, absolutely.
The Mariposa grant that set aside the Mariposa Grove of Giant Sequoias and Yosemite Valley was signed on June 30th, 1864 by Lincoln. I was part of their celebration of the 150th and talking about the connection to that and just kind of how amazing it is that we've got this country at war, but they're still thinking of the future, still thinking of how do we preserve it. You know, and the main thing that Lincoln's signature and that act did was remove those areas, the Mariposa Grove and Yosemite Valley, from the Homestead Act, which of course had been signed in just a few years before that in 62. So, you know, setting these aside for the future at a time when you're not even sure if that country is going to still exist in a few years, you know, it takes a
What is that future?
Right. I think that's actually a great segue point, Jana, because talking about the future of the country and the fact that the Lincoln administration in 62 and 64 is looking towards the future of the country and how it's going to expand, and also looking at the natural resources for the country and things that might need to be preserved or should be preserved. Lincoln himself was very happy, for lack of a better term, on the day of the Ford's Theater assassination.
Oh, yeah.
He was talking about the future and what he would be doing after his second term. And I think that's a great spot to really kind of pick things up. So we'd love it if you kind of told us a bit about what's going on with Lincoln, with Ford's Theater, and so forth.
Yeah, so, you got to remember it's Easter weekend,
Mm-hmm.
April 14th, 1865. You've had a couple of things that have just happened that really give that sense of the world is changing and there is a future that the nation can look forward to. Richmond has fallen, just 11 days before that on the 3rd. Robert E. Lee's army has surrendered on the 9th. So that's huge. When you think back just a year before that, with the Battle of Monocacy, Lincoln is looking like he's going to lose the election, that there's going to be a suit for peace when the Democrats and McClellan win, that we're going to have a divided nation. So really, in 1 year, the world really turned upside down for him. So he is in a better place than he has been in a long time. And on April 11th, he actually gives a speech. It's the last public speech that he gives. And Booth is in the crowd at that. I don't know if you guys covered this, but a little bit.
We've referenced it, but we don't get into the speech.
Well, he talks about a wide range of things, but it's a very future-looking speech. And one of the things that he talks about that really, I think, is a catalyst and for what comes on the 14th is he talks about granting citizenship to the members of the U.S. colored troops, especially giving them the right to vote for their service to the nation, and also to other African Americans moving forward. And that is, according to witnesses after the fact, sets Booth off because he is in the crowd there watching this with Lewis Powell or Lewis Payne, depending on which name you want to use. And, he is incensed by this. He says, N-word citizenship, by God,
I shall put him through or something like that.
Huh?
I shall put him through or something to that extent.
Exactly. He makes a statement at that point. And a lot of historians look to that speech and that moment as the moment that the conspiracy really turns from being about kidnapping Lincoln to assassinating Lincoln. That it's that rage over extending equal rights or even not even equal rights, but citizenship and the right to vote to African-American men is the trigger for everything that happens after that.
The Booth is just seething at this point. Like he just can't handle it.
He can't handle it. He is irate. He is so angry. It doesn't look like there's a clear plan, though, of what's gonna happen until the morning of the 14th, when Booth goes to Ford's Theater to pick up his mail. It was a pretty common thing for actors who had no fixed address at that time. They would have their mail forwarded to different theaters in different cities where they were playing. So for Booth, even though he's not currently acting in any of the plays, he is having all of his mail sent to Ford's Theater. He's living in a hotel in Washington at the National Hotel. He's having his mail sent there. And so it's just kind of happenstance that he stops by to pick up his mail, and the Ford brothers are in this, kind of whirlwind of cleaning up the theater and fixing up the box and hanging up bunting and putting up George Washington's portrait on the box because there is no presidential seal, and that's kind of what stands in for it.
Which I hadn't known that until I actually went to a program at Ford's Theater. That's where I learned that.
Me too.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, people always ask because the portrait of George Washington is there, with the flags, and it's there was no presidential seal until much later. So that's what people, everybody recognized George Washington. Everybody, if you saw that, you knew that the president was coming that night.
George Washington, the original presidential seal.
There you go.
Exactly. So, Booth observes all of this and finds out that Lincoln, and not just Lincoln, but Grant, are supposed to be coming that night to watch the play Our American Cousin, which was a comedy and supposed to be one of the most hilarious plays in production at that time. So, by hearing and finding this out, that really creates this opportunity that Booth decides to seize upon to attack the president. And he gathers as many of his co-conspirators as he can, which isn't many of them, because most of them have who were like O'Laughlin and some of the others have gone back to Baltimore. The plan had originally been in March to kidnap Lincoln and ransom him for prisoner exchanges. And when that fell apart, quite a few of them back off and go back home and give up on it. They're all paranoid that the authorities know that Lincoln knew, and that's why he didn't go to the other play. And so most of the conspirators have given up, and he's really only able to get in touch with a handful of them. Lewis Powell, Mary Surratt, who lives close by, George Atzerodt, and
George.
Yes.
Old George.
Poor George.
Almost poor George. We got into that on the show. Like, a lot of people feel bad for George, and I was like, I come to the line, and before crossing it into feeling bad, I stopped, because eventually he did understand and still kind of kept going. So it's like, I get it. But then you cross the line, George. You effed around and you found out.
That's true.
Yeah.
That was our final judgment on George.
And Davy Harold, of course, is in on this too. So he's only able to gather a handful of them after he gets this intelligence, And part of the reason he gets the intelligence is not just that the Fords are decorating, they're pulling their best personal furniture and putting it in the box there to get it ready for the Lincolns.
So this wasn't Ford's theater property then? This was their personal?
No. So we think of theaters as having fixed seats, right?
Sure.
Back in the day, it was a free-for-all of whatever furniture you could gather and bring in. So
even in like a fine establishment, you had like mixed matched seating.
Absolutely, mismatched, chairs, and the only
probably cool looking
that you really had fixed seating would have been up in the family circle because it was benches.
Right.
Everything else, was movable chairs, and they were usually, like cane chairs, lightweight, cheap, inexpensive chairs. But for the presidential box, you want to have your good furniture. And where are you keeping your best furniture? In your parlor. Right. So they're pulling all of their personal best furniture, their rocking chair, their settee, the love seat, everything, and putting it in that box.
And this isn't just like Lincoln coming to the theater, because when we discussed it, in the Q2 episode, like Lincoln is known kind of for going to the theater. He's been about town, but this is two things. It's Lincoln with Grant,
right? And
they just won. I mean, symbolically, obviously, we know, like, just for those of you who are going to about to nitpick me, yes, there are other Confederate armies still in the field at this point, but symbolically, the war has just been won. And so, like,
quick end.
The writing's on the wall. It's a matter of time.
Right. So we have the president, which is always a big deal, never to put that down, but like the bigger deal is the general in chief of the army, the man of the hour himself is with him. And they're coming to, I guess, a play that's been out for a while, but it doesn't matter. It's these two star guys that are coming. It's
stars. It's considered to be one of the funniest plays out there at that time. Our American Cousin. The whole point is the bumpkin country American who's in England. So that trope, that was funny even 150 years ago.
Still funny now.
The uncouth American goes to England. So you've got that play. Lincoln's coming to that. There's this sense, I mean, there have been basically ongoing parties in the streets of Washington, D.C. after the word arrived that Lee had surrendered. So like people are really in this joyous mood. The other thing about this is an advertising opportunity.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Brothers actually put ads in the local newspapers that are going out and print up flyers that they're posting around town that tonight and tonight only, Lincoln, the president, and General Grant are going to be seeing this play. So people are buying their tickets and coming to see the play, yes, but even more so, they're coming to see the president and Grant. And the way that the booths are in Ford's Theater, like, it is not the best seat in the house to be up there in one of those boxes. Actually kind of crappy seats if you're in terms of watching the play, because you're on the side and you're actually more turned facing the audience than you are the play. So those boxes are more about being seen by the audience than they are about you actually having a great view of the stage.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about that.
So the theater owners are basically showing off to the audience the A-list, the VIPs that they're getting to come into their theater and watch the plays they're putting on.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it in terms of like nightclubs in Hollywood or New York City that advertise that, this star or that star is going to be at their club.
Oh, yeah. I remember when people would advertise for me, they'd say Pat McGuire from that metal band is coming, and they would go to the club and they would line up. It was such a crazy atmosphere.
Really?
No,
okay.
None of that ever happened. But I do know what you're talking about. It's kind of like that convenient when you can see the other side of the velvet rope at a nightclub and you're like, who is it? You're like, oh my God, it's somebody famous. Pick whoever you want to. Pick it, make it whoever you want it to be. But it's like, and then you go and they're like, are you on the list? And you're like, no. They make you leave.
Exactly. But I mean, that is the element. Like the Lincoln and the Grants theoretically at their invitation are coming to see the play, but the public is coming to see them watching the play.
That's awesome.
They're so the Fords are trying to sell all the tickets that they can, and because they're not fixed seats, today I think the capacity for Ford's Theater is around 700 tickets per showing.
Ford's Theater is still an active playhouse?
It is. It's still an active theater. They do plays basically through the fall, through the spring, under normal conditions. But, this year has not been normal.
Nice.
That's jumping ahead a little bit in the story, but didn't Stanton basically say never again for a while, that this is not going to be a playhouse? And what was it, around the centennial of the war that it started doing plays again or something like that? And I apologize to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Not quite in the what we're discussing.
Yeah, so the feelings, I mean, yes, they did kind of condemn the play. Stanton uses government funds to buy it, but it wasn't so much his personal opinion as public opinion at that time. Nobody could ever imagine going to Ford's Theater again and laughing.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And so people were threatening the Ford brothers. If they reopened the Playhouse, they were going to burn it to the ground.
Well, that's counterintuitive. I love this so much, I will destroy it.
Well,
it's more the idea of they didn't want to see them necessarily making money off of.
It's like trampling. It's like dancing on a grave unintentionally, in a way.
Yeah. It's like that. There's still doubt and confusion. How much were the Fords in on it? They arrested in the immediate aftermath too. I mean, nobody knew how big the conspiracy was. So there's still a lot of suspicion. There's a lot of anger. There's still a lot of sadness. And so the idea of Ford's Theater ever being a working playhouse again is considered, sacrilege. It's considered dancing on a grave. disrespectful to
taboo.
Very taboo.
Don't do it. All right. Well, so there's advertisements going around Washington. The Ford brothers have been, basically not subtly at all telling the world that we have the two men of the hour, coming to our theater to watch this. And it's not just one of the funniest plays out there. It's like we talked about this with Kobe. It's Laura Keene's 100th performance of this play. So it's like a milestone performance, one you want to be there for.
Absolutely.
And then Booth's obviously just happening to get his mail there. He's going to grab up some of the squad that's still around. So things are kind of happening very quickly on April 14th. So sort of take us through how it sort of progresses from just sort of rounding up who we could round up to actually putting this plan into action, and how the theater, Booth's relationship with the theater, and how how it made all this kind of possible on the April 14th.
So, Booth has done plays there many, many times. He is a famous actor. He's one of the A-list celebrities of the time. He knows the ins and outs of the theater, every trap door, every kind of backstage passage. He's familiar with it. So when he realizes that two of the men he hates most in this world are going to be there together tonight, he sees it as an opportunity. I think it would even be appropriate to say that he sees this as God putting this before him, that this is his responsibility, and he is meant to do this, and this is an affirmation in his mind.
Because it couldn't have happened at any other theater. It's just so perfect that it's this theater that he knows, and
I can totally see Booth thinking that.
Well, he knows the other theaters too, but he's not getting his mail there. He's not close friends, with
the crew.
Yeah, so he finds this out, and he makes some preparations. He grabs a broken music stand leg from the orchestra pit area and takes that up to the box. He goes up there to inspect it to see what they're doing, and kind of curious, like people do now. See what the furniture they're putting in. And
what are you guys doing up here? What's that? We're just prepping for the president. He's like, oh, okay.
Exactly. So he hides that piece of wood, kind of tucks it in a corner where nobody's going to see it. So he's already doing some preparations. Then he leaves and puts the word out, starts, like you said, gathering up as many of his co-conspirators as possible, and develops a plan. He goes to Mary Surratt's boarding house just a couple blocks away, and has her take a package to her tavern that she owns and is leasing to someone else, and asks her to take a message to the innkeeper and have him get ready the firearms that he left there in preparation for when they thought they were kidnapping the president. He also expands his idea at some point, and we don't know exactly when, and maybe it was because Grant was, he's under the impression that Grant is going to be there too, that this becomes more than just about the president. It becomes about killing not just Lincoln, but killing the United States, and killing the United States government specifically.
Right.
Yeah, we described it as decapitating the government.
Absolutely.
Okay.
He wants to kill anybody that would be in the immediate line of secession that would step up and keep things going. So he targets the president, Grant, the head of the army, but also the vice president, Andrew Johnson, and Seward. Because
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, because he's also in the cabinet, but also because he is a very vocal abolitionist. and has spoken and promoted pretty harsh terms for the South.
Booth's not one of these guys that just like is like, I don't like Yankees. I hate using that term, but like he's like, if you are especially more in the, not just like I support the Union, but I'm pro the abolition, like he's got like an extra gear for that. Like
he's a white supremacist.
Yeah. I mean, saying it flatly in modern terms, absolutely. He's a absolute white supremacist. But it's just like, it's interesting to see throughout the exploration of this story, like how that manifests. Like he really has this, like, it's ingrained in the fibers of his existence, like this, the way the world should be in his eyes. And like anybody that challenges it, speaks against it, even like flirts just with the concept of it. Cause like, I remember like just in reading, like if like in more quieter conversations and things like that, like he just hates this idea of equality and enfranchisement and everything like that on every level. So
absolutely,
Seward is especially a good target for him because he likes the concept of decapitating the government, but he's also an abolitionist and he just believes that these people are the worst, which is ironic because white supremacists are the worst.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, you've got a lot of people who still try to justify or rationalize Booth's plot and his behavior as that he just hated Lincoln, or it was his love for the South that drove him to it. And it's like, no, it's his white supremacy. It's his hatred of anybody that does not look like him that drives him to do this. It's not, you know, if it had been about the South for him, why did he stay in the North and continue to earn large amounts of money throughout the war? He could have gone to the South. He could have, you know, he supposedly promised his mother he wouldn't enlist and he wouldn't fight. And that's why he never fights for the South, even though that's where his heart is. Okay, but then just go and do tours and work in the South. He never suffers any hardship really on behalf of the South.
I mean, go be that weird scene in Gods and Generals where they're like having a bandstand trying to lift morale. Like Booth could have shown up in the ANV or the Army of Tennessee at any point and tried to lift spirits. I don't know of any times that he showed up in the front lines to like boost morale.
Nope. No.
What a jabroni.
Jeez.
So that afternoon, he's pulling these pieces together and he's making assignments for people. You know, he's got, he's going to take the president and Grant himself.
Of course he is.
Well, that was an aspect, Jana, that Pat and I have discussed quite a bit, and we have with our previous guest as well. That fits really well with this. He's not going to join up with the Confederate military or anything either, because that's too random. That's too one of the men in the ranks. It's too
average.
Thank you. It's too average. He needs to be that guy. He needs to have his own special moments. Even if he believes it's the thing that really needs to happen to save his cause, he's got to be the guy to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, he there's no doubt that he is used to being the center of attention.
Yeah.
I mean, his vanity is exceptional.
Well, I mean, he's considered extremely good looking at the time. He's famous. He's rich. You know, he's used to walking in places and having heads turn and people wanting to be near him and wanting to give him favors. So, yeah, it's not surprising that he, in his own drama that he's creating, puts himself in the starring role. No surprise in that. I think there's also an element of who else among this group would be able to just get access to the president's box without any questions asked.
That's a good point.
He's famous. He's a star. He can walk right up and people are going to open doors for him. Whereas nobody's going to do that for George Atzerodt, German.
Who are you?
Nobody's going to do that for Lewis Powell.
Nobody's going to want to get in Powell's way, but yeah, they're not going to open the door for him.
No. So So he is really the only one that can access, with no questions asked, the presidential box during the play. You know, and you also got to remember that this audience that's there, you know, it's a packed house, but a good number of the people attending the play are Union soldiers themselves.
Sure.
They're either you know, stationed there, or they're at the hospitals. You know, there's
on leave.
And so he is walking into this theater with, you know, 1,700 members of the audience, a large number of whom are soldiers and armed themselves. It's got to be somebody who can walk in and not draw any questions.
Can't turn heads the wrong way.
Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
Basically, you can turn heads because you're famous, but you can't be suspicious looking.
Exactly. So he saves that piece for himself. He assigns George Atzerodt to go to the, after Andrew Johnson. He assigns Lewis Powell to go after Seward. He gives these assignments out, and, you know, he goes back to his room. He writes a letter to his mother. Another one, I believe, that he gives to a friend and asks him to mail it in a few days.
Now, is that the supposed blackmail letter that he's going to kind of keep some of his crew, specifically Atzerodt, in line with? Or is this a different letter?
You know, we don't know what was in the letter, because the guy he gave it to actually destroyed it after he realizes what Booth has done. You know, he supposedly burned the letter.
I wonder if that's the blackmail letter.
It probably was.
It may be, but my understanding is, like, we have no way of knowing what was in that letter, because, you know, I mean, you've got to consider it. Your friend gives you this letter, asks you to mail it for him, and it's innocent enough. You know, less than 24 hours later, he's being hunted by the entire Union Army and has murdered the president.
Why wouldn't he hand the letter over, though? Just to, like, maybe wash his hands of it real fast? Like, I'm not a part of this?
Because he doesn't want to be associated at all.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's trying to cut and hide any connections to him that's possible. So
I literally said, I don't believe the blackmail letter exists, but now I'm entirely rethinking that, because I don't think we even mentioned that Booth wrote a letter to somebody and handed it to a friend, because that's kind of interestingly coincidental that there was a letter that was supposed to be mailed and then destroyed, and we know nothing about it. Like, that right. Sounds like that could be the blackmail letter.
Sounds like it. Do we know what happened to the letter to his mother? Did that actually get sent?
I believe that actually was posted. You know, he was very close to his mother and his sister. Sure. It's been a while since I've read that, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't specifically state what he's going to do, but, you know, kind of says farewells just in case. So.
Mama, I'm going to kill the president.
Yeah, unlikely.
That's plain English there, John.
He doesn't go that far.
Right.
You started to mention how close he was to his sister Asia as well. Does he tie her into that letter too? Do you recall?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe it's kind of it's and again, for your listeners who are like, no, it was this. It's been a few years since I've read this.
You're doing awesome.
Yes. Caveat. This is now in the future for
that's right.
Jana's historical work. She's at an 1864 site now.
That's right. You guys are time traveling. You guys are prophesizing right now.
Yeah.
You should stop this from happening, guys. Since you know, in 1864.
If we'd only known.
We would. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's writing letters. He's making his preparations. He rents a couple horses from a stable for himself to get away, and for some of the other members of the party. And then he kind of just kills time. he's waiting for it to be evening. He, some accounts I've read, there's belief that he had stopped by the theater after it started and, kind of discovered that the Lincolns hadn't arrived yet, that they're, so he goes to a bar, but he's killing time until nightfall. What he doesn't realize, and what the Ford brothers don't know, is that the Grants are not coming. The Grants...
Julia.
Yeah, Julia.
Shut it down. Shut it down, Grant.
Well, I mean, you can't blame her. When Mary Lincoln goes off on her in public because, Lincoln said a nice word to her, courteous.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have wanted to spend much time with Mary.
We heard she was a very difficult person.
She was insecure. She was incredibly jealous of Lincoln. I really think that, and granted, some of it's hard to know, like how much this is, her enemies talking about her. People love to talk about how she loved to shop and buy things, but you also have to remember every single time they had an open house at the White House, she had to replace like all of the drapes and all of the furniture because people were cutting up pieces of it as souvenirs,
Right.
Yes.
Try that today, folks. Go visit the White House and try to take a souvenir and see where that gets you.
Yeah. Please don't.
Yeah, don't do that.
No, don't do that. The History Things podcast specifically does not want you to test the Capitol defense system. As you can see, they're going to win. So don't do it.
Yes. So, I think Mary Lincoln gets a lot of bad press. I also think that if she were alive today, she would benefit greatly probably from some of the modern medications that we have. I never diagnosed somebody. It's very dangerous to prescribe mental illness or other problems to historical figures, but it seems very likely that she probably had some sort of mental illness.
On top of and we talked about this, and I'm going to correct it in our follow-up episode, but I'll kind of low-key correct it now. Why I had mentioned that, one of the stories I like about the Lincolns was their time at the Lincoln Cottage, and I had incorrectly stated that they were spending time there because of being a grieving family, but I kind of conflated two things, and I'll get into that in the follow-up. But it doesn't. Mary's personality, she is eccentric. She does have the difficult behavior. She does likely have a mental illness or some.
She's lost two.
But she's lost children at this point, and I have children. Jana, you have children. I couldn't imagine what that would do to you in the long term, and so that obviously impacts you in ways. And so you add on, you have a peculiar personality to begin with, and then you add in something intense, not once but twice, and then now you're the most famous lady in the country. There's a lot of pressure, and it'll make you weird.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, she is not welcomed by the Washington, D.C. female community when they arrive. That was the ultimate Mean Girls Club of the 1860s. And they snub her hard. They do not like her. She's not Southern enough for the Southerners, and she's not Northern enough for the Northerners.
That's what all you Midwesterners are, Matt.
Thanks for that.
Matt's from Michigan, in case you didn't know that.
Yeah. She's an outcast, and they never let her forget that. So, so you add, she doesn't have friends. She doesn't have support. Her family, she's got some members of her family that are siding with the Confederates. She's got other members of her family that are fighting for the Union. And, so she's got some of her family that hates her husband. And so she's had a rough life. And
I'm just kidding.
Well, and she loses some family members in the war, too. Not only does she have two of her sons die by this point, but she's going to lose a couple of family members during the war years as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I feel bad for Mary, and I don't think she has always been treated fairly or kindly by historians looking back.
I agree with that. One of the
Judge,
aspects
but-
that I think was particularly poignant, though, is that Daniel Day-Lewis's Lincoln points out that history, when Sally Field's portrayal of Mary is saying that, oh, history is going to hate me, blah, 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 he says they don't know you. They don't know the situation. They're not looking at the full picture. And I think many historians are beginning to come around to that in regards to the first family and Mary Lincoln specifically.
Absolutely. I think the recent scholarship about her has been a lot more even-handed.
I would agree with that.
Well, it's easy to pick at the low-hanging fruit. So like the peculiar stuff that's negative, it's easy to focus on that. But when you need to take a bigger, longer, broader look, it takes time to get there. And as a study, that's probably what we're just doing. You know, we're understanding in real time a better understanding of mental illness just in the current world and society we live in, and being able to take that knowledge we're gaining now and apply it in sort of a retrospect. You know, we're like, oh, these people might not have just been weird. They might have just had something like a chemical imbalance or a mental illness or something. And like you said, Jana, like some things, like some of the more modern medicinal approaches to it could have been, you know, instrumental in changing or affecting, you know, those behavioral traits, stuff like that.
Or even just the fact that, I mean, supposedly people said that Mary was very ambitious and that, you know, she really pushed Lincoln early on to get into politics. And, you know, what if she had been alive today in a world where she could run herself?
Mary Todd, 2024.
Yeah, it's a fine point.
The frustration and the sorrow and the pain that she, you know, endured throughout her life, both the limitations that are put on her, but then the losses that she suffered with her sons, with family members, with
Husband.
And yeah, I mean, it's. I believe she's a tragic figure.
Absolutely.
Now,
Grant, however, might have had another word for her.
True. Yeah, good point. Moving back towards April 14th, with the events leading up to the assassination, you'd mentioned that the Lincolns actually are not at Ford's Theater when the play starts.
Oh, no. So they, you know, the play starts and they don't come. I mean, they're arriving fashionably late, you know, whether that was because they didn't want to deal with the crowds going into the theater, whether that's because, you know, Lincoln was finishing up work. You know, there's some speculation that he had a premonition. There's some people who say that Mary didn't want to go, that she had a headache, you know, whatever. They came late, and that wasn't that unusual. You know, it's kind of like...
you don't want to get to the party right when it starts. That's weird.
Yeah. Well, or, you know, flipping the channels, you know, you start a movie midway because you already know what happens. You've seen this movie, you know, like several times. You're not going or watching it really for the story or to find out what happens. You're watching it because you enjoy seeing it. And so they're not going because this is the first time they've seen the play or heard about it. They're going just for entertainment. And
right.
So they're showing up, you know, well into, gosh, I forget which act it was in, but it was well into the play by the time they arrived. My favorite part about it is, though, that they kind of try to sneak in, which is hilarious when you think about Lincoln sneaking in anywhere. You know?
With his 6'4".
Yeah.
Yes, Matt, he is 6'4", not 6'5", as I was corrected so harshly by my co-host on the first show.
You know, so, I mean, he's not trying to draw attention to himself, but yeah, when you're 6'4" and you're walking in, you know, he has to go in the building, up the stairs, and across the back of the balcony to get to the box. You know, it's like the far side. It's not the balcony, you know, the box right there close to the stairs. It's the other one.
Was he doing like the stadium shuffle where you're like, excuse me, sorry, excuse me, and everybody's trying to move their knees all weird, and this guy's just 6'5", 4"?
You know, I get the impression more that like he's trying to slink along the back of the theater, you know, to get in. And of course, the actors see him. You know, they see him walking in, and so they stop the action on the play on the stage, and Laura directs the orchestra to play "Hail to the Chief." So like there's
we'd heard about that this was the one change they were planning to do at the show, was do "Hail to the Chief," but I didn't realize it was the actors that kind of tell
hit
the
it.
orchestra pit to hit it.
Lincoln's like on the back wall, suddenly a spotlight hits him, he's like, this is our hey, how you doing? Thanks for voting for me.
Exactly. So, you kind of, you think of it like that, it's like, oh, sorry about that, sneak in, and they stop everything and give him
awkward.
a standing ovation.
And he acknowledges the crowd from the box or something like that, doesn't he?
He does. He acknowledges, they got to wait for everybody to settle down, kind of make their way to the box. And of course, it's not the Grants with them because, Julia Grant and Mary Grant Julia Grant hated Mary.
Yeah.
Mary
will not go to that play with that woman.
Exactly. And so they conveniently decide they really need to leave town that afternoon to get up to see their children. So they are already on their way out of town on the train before the play starts. So, the Lincolns, though, they're kind of left in this jam because, so the Grants decline, but they've already paid for the tickets and told, the Fords that they'd have other people. So now they're scrambling all afternoon to try and find people to join them. And people just keep declining their invitation.
Does anybody want to hang out with us tonight? Jeez.
Well, I don't think Lincoln's the issue. I think it goes back to that Mary Lincoln of...
Yeah.
Well, and something that we touched on, the city's a partying too. There's a lot of celebrating going on with the end of the war basically right there. So we speculated before it might have been just because a lot of folks had other engagements. They'd already seen this play and that sort of thing.
And they've already seen Lincoln at a theater. They're like, look, this is awesome, but you don't just win a war every day. We just won, baby.
There's a lot of, especially like when you look at, I forget all the details of who they try, but it's a lot of people who I think Mary had offended in the past with her behavior.
Okay. I was not aware of that.
People who don't want to, they're like, yeah, no, thanks, I'll pass.
Join the club, Mary.
Yeah, and so they finally get Clara Harris, who is a young woman who Mary is friendly with. They're kind of in polite society, and her fiance, Major Henry Rathbone, are the ones that end up accompanying the Lincolns to the play. So they've gone from the A-list Grant to like the not even on the list Major Rathbone and Clara Harris.
But what a big night for them, though, for Clara and Major Rathbone.
The commander-in-chief says, I am ordering you to attend this play with me. I am your boss. Technically, you cannot say no. He's like, all right, sir.
Well, I think that invitation comes through Clara, and her father is in Congress. I forget. I think he's a representative, but he may have been a senator. But so that's how they know her, and that's how they end up there. But yeah, so it's, they've gone through the list. They all get there. There's you're either mortified that they stopped the play and acknowledge you, or you're soaking it up because they stopped the play and acknowledge your party because you're with the president. We don't know which one it was. But they get back to the box, get settled in, onto the Ford's very best furniture that's in the box for them, and the play resumes. During this time, while the play is going on and they're arriving, Booth is actually next door in the Star Saloon, having a few drinks to fortify his courage.
Getting that liquid courage going.
Exactly. And so he probably would have heard the crowd go nuts when the Lincolns arrive.
He certainly would have known what Hail to the Chief meant.
He said, bartender, make it a double. It's almost showtime.
Jeez.
So he then, after they've arrived and things have settled down, he knows this play by heart. He knows where all the punchlines are, where all the lines.
Has he been in this play before?
It's not even that he's been in it. He was considered more of a dramatic actor than he was a comedian.
Oh, right. Caesar, Shakespeare's, and things like that.
Yeah, and his father, Junius, was a great Shakespearean actor. So, they were more of these serious actors, not those comedians. But you can't have been in the theater at that time. And, it's a hit play. It's, it.
I'm a metalhead, but I know some Katy Perry songs. I get it. When it's famous, you just kind of know the words. That's a good analogy. Yeah. He's a firework. Let your colors. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm not.
He comes over and goes upstairs, while the play is going on, walks straight up to the box and hands the man sitting outside. And the other thing to understand about the play is that there were no guards outside the presidential box. There were guards that escorted them from the White House to the theater, Union soldiers who are there on guard detail. But once they get to the theater, it never even occurs to anyone that Lincoln could still be in danger. But, so they've dismissed the guards. The guy who's sitting outside the door, whose name is escaping me, he's not even a bodyguard or any kind of protection. He's really there as a runner. In case the president needs to, thinks of something and has a dispatch he needs to send, or somebody shows up with a dispatch for the president, so that he can take it into him. He is not there to be any sort of protection or even really to be a door,
He's like an orderly, basically, just sitting there and waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, he's not expected to, fight off somebody for the president. He's not expected to do anything except, run errands and get things. Because again, nobody imagined that once he's in the theater, once he's in that box with a theater full of soldiers and civilians, that there's any risk to the president. And so Booth, though, because he's Booth and he's in a theater and he's famous and everybody wants to know him and see him, just walks up to the door and hands the guy his carte de visite. He is making no effort to hide who he is. He is playing it out there. He's using his fame to get access. And, sure, the president likes actors, so he opens the door and lets him in. The other thing you have to understand about the box is that there's an outer door, there's an inner hallway, because normally this is two boxes, not one. There's a partition that's between them. So there are two doors that lead into the inner box. Because it was a large party, they had taken it down and it was just one big space. But normally it would be divided into two separate boxes right there. So there are two doors that go in. So when Booth comes in, he comes into that middle hallway and stops. And it's then that wooden leg from the music stand that he had hidden earlier comes into play, because he uses that to wedge into that outer door and really stick it shut, so that the harder anybody pushes at the outside, the more it's going to dig in and become stuck. And he just waits there. He doesn't go into the inner box. He waits. And he's waiting for a very specific line in the play.
Pat knows the line pretty well.
You suckologizing old man trap.
Yep. I don't know the manners of good society, eh?
Yeah.
Enough to turn you inside out, you old gal, you old suckologizing
old man trap.
Yep.
What a diss. I wish we still talk like that. You imagine in high school, gets out of line, your kid, because I think you have a high school or close to high school age kid. Imagine like he drops that one in the hallway. He'd be like, I'm impressed, actually.
Actually, I could see him. He loves history. He doesn't like American history because that's what mom does. You know,
Sure.
You know, yeah, that would be the kind of thing he would say.
That's cool, though. I'd be like, look, you're suspended, obviously, because there's rules in school, but like, I'm not terribly unproud of you for that. Good job. Don't get in trouble in school, kids. Don't say sockdologizing old man trap to anybody. They'll be confused, but if they figure it out, they might be offended. So don't do it.
Yeah. So that he's waiting for that line because when the theater laughs, it's not just going to laugh. People are going to hoot. They're going to holler. They're going to stomp their feet. They're going to make this incredible amount of noise. You know, it's going to be deafening in there. And that's really what he's waiting for, is that burst of noise, you know, that's going to take a few minutes for the play to get back on track. They're going to have to wait.
Is this the kind of thing that makes the actors crack up and kind of break character?
Yeah, probably. Or, you know, they've got to just kind of pretend to, you know, stoically wait for it to pass. But you're not going to continue saying your lines because nobody's going to hear it.
They're not going to hear you. You're not connected to a PA system, so you kind of need everybody to be quiet.
That's an interesting.
No. So,
I mean,
so he's waiting. Huh? Go ahead.
I was going to say, we think about watching a play today. There can be laugh lines and funny lines and stuff, but we don't go ballistic generally in a theater. But it was much more of a spectator event in the 19th century than it is today.
Exactly. You know, and nobody's mic'd. Everybody's projecting their voices. You've got to wait for the audience to calm down before you can talk. So that's his whole plan centers around that and waiting for that. Now, there's great debate. Did he drill a hole in the outer door so he could, you know, look in and see where the president is or what he's doing? People debate about that, or whether the Ford...
I read both, that he did, and some say that he didn't. It's interesting. He wouldn't need it. He knows that play so well.
He knows that play, and he frankly would have seen where the president was sitting when he's walking up across, you know, the back of the balcony to see. You know, it's like I said before, the way the boxes are, you're actually more facing the audience than you are the stage when you're in that box. So
I have a hard time with this question just because of the amount of physical evidence that like if that had happened, don't you think we would have known that? Don't you think they would have found that on the door, and that would have been something that became commonly known instantly?
There is a hole in the door.
But they're like, in terms of the, like, was this drilled by Booth? Is that the question?
Yeah, so people say, did he drill a hole in the door? Others say, no, the Fords had already drilled the hole in the door so that they could check on the occupants of the box during
weird voyeur stuff right there. Calm down, Fords.
I don't know.
That's weird.
That it's that, you know, it's just, if your money is based on people having a good time, you want to make sure that things are going well, and you know, you're just checking to see how things are going. We don't know if it was Booth. We don't know if it was the Fords. And like you said, I think he knew the play well enough that he didn't even have to see. He knew where Lincoln was seated. That's all he needed to know. You know, the line is delivered. The house goes crazy. He opens the door, steps in, takes a step forward, and fires his single-shot Derringer just behind Lincoln's left ear. And Lincoln at that moment is also laughing. He is leaned forward in the rocking chair. He's turned slightly to the left, and he is watching the crowd. You know, his last moments of consciousness would have been in laughter and joy. And that's like maybe the one solace I find in this whole story is that his last moments were very joyful. And
good point.
He's watching the crowd. He's watching them enjoy themselves. He's laughing at the line. He's holding Mary's hand. And when Booth fires that shot and it passes in through his brain and lands right in his right temple, right behind the skull. And he instantly slumps forward. Mary is sitting next to him holding his hand. He slumps forward. Rathbone will say that he more smelled the gunfire than he did hear it because of the noise of the crowd. That's, as you know from shooting a cannon, shooting black powder is a very particular odor. And
there's a sulfury, eggy smell that goes with it. You know it.
And if you've fired a weapon like that, you recognize that smell instantly. Rathbone jumps up and tries to grab Booth. Now, one of the things I wrestle with Booth, and some people think he's this genius, is why would you have only brought a single shot gun with you if you know that you're going to kill two people?
So I think what we agreed on was, well, I actually have a question before I get into that. When do you think Booth is aware that Grant is not part of this deal?
I think at that moment.
So you don't think he's aware that Grant isn't part of this until he steps into that box? Or until he steps up and is like kind of shuffling around the back? He's like, oh, that's a different dude with Lincoln.
Exactly. Because the Fords don't know until then.
Right. Good point.
Nobody knows really. The Lincolns aren't going to advertise that they got stood up by the Grants. They had told the theater that they were joining them before they had even asked the Grants. So,
well, my answer still kind of revolves around what we talked about in the show, but then I think Booth might have thought he was Superman himself, because obviously Booth goes in there with the knife too, and Major Rathbone's going to find out about that, as you're going to talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
But we talked about that. When I said Booth's vanity is extreme, we talked about he casts himself as the main actor in this great plot, in this, he's not this common soldier fighting in an army in an average rank. He casts
himself as Brutus.
That's what I mean. Yes, right. That's what I mean. So it's this whole huge thing, and adding, because we talked about why not go in there with like a Navy Colt or an Army Colt.
Yeah.
But maybe we talked about it adding more drama, and maybe the goal, whether it's Grant or anybody else or not, is I'm going to shoot one of them and I'm going to stab the other one, and that sounds dumb, but if you're kind of tracking what we're talking about with Booth, he is dramatic in every possible way. He's making his own plot dramatic so that he can just, it's going to sound cringy. He's going to get off on it. This is his life moment.
Yeah. If you're that much of a narcissist, you're going to put as much drama into this event as you can. And having a single shot Derringer, yes, it fits very well in the pocket. You can hide it easily. But having that single shot Derringer and then a knife is much more dramatic than rolling in with a Henry or something like that.
Because we also talked about the fact that Lincoln's not a feeble old man, right? We discussed the stuff he does with the axe handles to show off for the troops. We talked about that he's a wrestling champ, and Major Rathbone's a younger guy, and Booth making a mistake is going to go very badly for him, because there's two guys that can kick his ass sitting in this booth. Yep. But what if the gun misfires? Then it's two guys and a knife. There's so much pointless drama that, one, it just seems like maybe if Booth is planning this drama, that he's just steamrolling and he's out of control with the plan at this point. Or there's not as much of a plan maybe as we're thinking. He's kind of just I'm winging it.
Well, so a Derringer is really more of a defensive or a dueling, you're going to keep it with you. It's a single shot. It's what you have in case you're attacked or being robbed, so that you can,
or your honor is besmirched.
It's not a weapon that's going to be used by the Army for anything. So it's probably, I think what it boils down to is it's what he had. is he had the Derringer, he has the knife. I'm not sure that he would have been easily able to get a hold of a different weapon, but I don't know. That it's a question that's out there.
We'll trade weapons with Powell, because Powell goes to.
He's got a Navy Colt.
Powell's got a Navy Colt. It'd be like, trade me guns. It's like in Men in Black. You take this noisy cricket, and I will take this bigger gun.
He's got that. He fires his shot. It's very effective in Lincoln, but then he's done. And, Rathbone is seated over kind of back towards the back corner. So it's possible Booth didn't know who was there or that he was there, that he couldn't see him as he's walking up. But regardless, at that point, when Rathbone smells the gunpowder, he jumps up to grab Booth, and Booth pulls out his knife and ends up cutting Rathbone basically from his wrist all the way down to his elbow. Just this vicious.
Yeah, it's a bad cut.
Bad cut that is bleeding profusely, like everywhere. And, that kind of, Rathbone's still trying to wrestle Booth, but he's bleeding badly. At around this time, Mary and Clara start screaming, and the crowd is just coming down from the laughter as, Booth then jumps from the box onto the stage, and it's about a 12-foot drop to there. And he's wearing riding boots, so no tennis shoes or anything that's going to absorb the fall. There's a lot of debate about what happens next. It's believed that his spur gets caught in the Treasury flag and tears it, that it throws him off balance. A lot of people believe he broke his leg then when he lands. Other people say that it happened later when his horse that he's riding falls and rolls on him. It's one of those great debates that we will never really know the answer to. What we can say is that in the folks that were interviewed who had been in the theater and witnessed it immediately afterwards, none of them talk about him limping off of the stage.
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
And with a break of that kind, it is hard to believe that he would have been able to get out that door without limping.
Yeah, even with the adrenaline. Yeah.
Yeah, the official line at the show here is that we agree that he rolled his ankle or leg broke when his horse rolled him somewhere on the way to or right around Soppers Hill and things like that.
I'm not a medical doctor, but it would not surprise me if he fractures it or does something, damages it in the jump. And then when the horse rolls on him, that's, kind of, they're, but none of the eyewitness accounts of that night that were taken that night talk about him limping. And then there's a great debate of what he does after that. The kind of famous story of it is that he then stands up on the stage and lifts up his knife, and it's dripping blood and says, "Sic semper tyrannis." Of course, some people say he just says "sic semper." Thus always to tyrants, which is both the Virginia state motto and a line from Julius Caesar, which is a play that he acted in many, many times, that thus always to tyrants. Now, of course, the audience is confused. They're stunned. They don't know, is this part of the play? Because that was something that often happened in plays too, especially with a well-known play, that you would end up with, them doing things to keep it fresh or, unusual. But Booth starts running out the back of the theater, and Mary at some point around that time yells, "Stop that man." And it kind of, people start realizing what's happened. That they're.
I didn't realize that it was Mary that actually kind of alerts everybody to the situation.
whether it's Mary, it's Claire, you know, like there's all this confusion, but one of them yells, "Stop that man." And, you know, the crowd starts realizing that this isn't part of the play, that this isn't something that was planned for. And they start to realize that the president is hurt. And, you know, Booth is able to exploit the chaos and the pandemonium to run out the back of the stage, jump onto the horse that he had rented earlier that day and positioned with one of the stagehands to hold on to. The guy who's holding it, one of the stagehands, he actually hits over the head with his pistol as he jumps on. That doesn't stop Ned Spangler from being arrested and accused of being part of the plot, even though, you know, he's knocked unconscious or you know.
Wait, so Ned gets whacked in this story?
Well, was it Ned is the hand that is arrested? Absolutely. But was Ned actually holding the horse, or was Peanut holding the horse?
I think maybe it does get handed to Peanut, but yeah, I mean, they're all basically initially detained.
Right.
And Ned.
Yeah, they're going to be caught with a dragnet.
I didn't realize Booth's flight from the theater was as dramatic, because one of the things that I asked was, you know, was there anybody that was kind of hot on his heels on his way out? Because we talked about the fact that aside from the raucousness of the moment of the play, like, this is not a moment that's front and center in front of everybody. I used a modern analogy, which I won't get into the whole story again, but like there was a modern musician who was murdered on stage in 2004, and everybody was looking right at it when it happened. And it still took everybody in a bunch of varying degrees, you know, different time frames to kind of register what was happening. You know, some people immediately, some people not. And
Absolutely.
like, this is a moment that takes place kind of up and to the right for the theater. So like, it's not front and center. And there was this distracting moment that immediately preceded it. So, you know, Booth hits the stage and has like a momentously big head start. So I thought that, you know, he had maybe escaped more or less untouched. And I asked if there was somebody hot on the heels, and we kind of thought there was one or two people that were close, but it sounds like he got into a scuffle on the way out.
There are one or two people, but you also got to remember the audience is divided from the stage by the orchestra pit.
Right.
So people have to like jump over that or run, you know, to get to the stage to follow him out the back.
Right.
So there's definitely a delay, and he gets a head start. And that's his whole, you know, from the beginning, that's been his plan, is that he needs to get in there and capitalize on the confusion and the chaos to get out of town. At that point, you know, Washington, D.C., all of the roads are still locked down at night. And
right.
He's got to get out of town, convince guards to let him out, which is easier than getting in, but still takes, you know, effort. And nobody can know that the president's been killed in order for him to get out. And so time is essential.
Yeah, he's moving ahead of the news and using his fame to help get away.
He's also gambling on the fact that he's going to get somebody that's kind of loose, because the bridges are done by 9, and this happens after 10 o'clock. And like Booth's, if he's been living in the city, he's not unaware of this bridge closure at 9 o'clock. So his entire plan is immediately revolving around the fact that I'm going to get to a bridge after it's closed, no matter what scenario plays out. And I'm going to get somebody who's not a total hard ass and let me across the bridge. Because I'll tell you what, rules are rules. And if I'm guarding that bridge, I don't care if you're the Pope. You ain't getting across my bridge. Bridge is closed.
So you also got to remember, even in D.C., all of these men that are on guard duty are, for the most part, 100-day men. So they're not well trained. They're not given the best, you know.
You've been listening to the History Things podcast.
Uniform.
Follow the guys on Facebook and
the war's
Instagram
wrapping
at
up.
the History Things podcast.
And the war's
for all the
wrapping up.
latest
What
news
do we
and
have to worry about?
Make sure to also follow Pat and Matt on their
Be
social
nice to 100
medias
days, man,
at
guys. You work at a
History
site where they're
Things
pretty
Pat
important.
and
That's
at
true.
Matt Gordon Books.
They are
Have a question,
absolutely
comment, or compliment
important.
for the
But
show?
the
Send us an
common
email
perception
at historythingspodcast@gmail.com.
the standing army
Thanks for listening.
on
We
both
hope
sides
you enjoyed
is
the show.
they're, you know,
Yeah.
Militia at best. Yeah.
they're going to run when serious.
Guard the warehouse, guys. We'll do the real fighting.
Right.
Exactly. That is the attitude. So, you know, he's gambling, but he is counting on, confusion, his fame, and his ability to charm and to sweet talk people to get him out of the city. And it works. He gets out.
I mean, I am mystified by the confidence that John Wilkes Booth has at this just like steamrolling plan, and his kind of like, yeah, it's going to work. I'm mystified by the amount of variables that he cannot control, that he just either doesn't have a plan for, or it's just like, I'm going to John Wilkes Booth myself through it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to be famous, and like being famous is going to work for me. And like, that's such a, like, it just blows my mind. And it like works almost the entire way through this whole saga, from the conception of the murder plot to almost his, I mean, he almost gets away. I mean, he's down into Virginia and things like that. And like a large portion of this entire story revolves around luck and the gambling that my celebrity will work in my favor. It's mind-numbing.
Well, you got to think about it. I think that is how his entire life has been.
Yeah, that's true.
He
Between
has
his father and his brothers. Yeah.
I mean, when your dad's Martin Sheen,
always been able to get what he wants and talk people and convince people to do what he wants, because he's charming, he's good looking, he's charismatic. People like him and they'll do things for him, even against their best judgment.
so he gets out of the theater. So what ends up happening, in the immediate aftermath, right? So obviously we in the main episode, we take the story that Booth, and the flight out of the city and into Maryland and further into Virginia. But like, since we're here to talk about Ford's Theater and in the aftermath there, like, so Booth is out of the theater and he's got his horse and he's gone now. What is happening in the theater? Lincoln's still in the box.
Lincoln's still in the box. Mary is screaming hysterically. Rathbone is bleeding everywhere. The crowds are trying to push down that outer door, but that stick that Booth put in place is holding firm. It is not going anywhere. And so you have a doctor who's being lifted up from the stage to try and climb over the balcony. And at the same time, you've got Rathbone who's realizing that the door is jammed, who's able to go over and finally remove that stick so that they can come in and, there's a surge of people into that box to try and figure out what's going on. And two of them are doctors. Charles Leal is probably the one that's best known, who ends up tending him. And one of the things, when they walk in, there's blood everywhere. And so they are convinced that it's from Lincoln. Like, they're not even...
Rathbone.
It's Rathbone. Rathbone's the one that's bleeding, but nobody's paying attention to Rathbone because who cares?
Yeah.
So he's over there with this vicious wound that's bleeding everywhere.
Two doctors, and they both go to Lincoln.
They both go to Lincoln.
I know.
And, they're checking him, trying to figure out where he's hurt. He's unconscious, but they can't, and they're like stripping off his shirt, trying to figure it out. And they can't find any wounds. And it's not until they turn him that they find this tiny hole right behind the ear and realize that he's been shot in the head. They also realize at some point that it's Rathbone that's bleeding. And so, somebody starts taking care of him. But because at this point in the war is a horrible thing, but it's really great at innovating medicine and has always been. And so you've got doctors who have been training out on the battlefields for the last 4 years, and they've seen all sorts of types of wounds. And because of that, when Dr. Leal sees this wound, he knows that Lincoln's not going to recover.
So in the box, there's at least one doctor who's like, this isn't going to be good.
Leal's a fairly young doctor too, isn't he?
He is. He's very young. But yeah, they know. I mean, they know. They've seen these kinds of wounds. They know that this isn't something that the president's going to recover from. But they also don't want him to die in the theater. I mean,
He deserves better than that.
Yeah, there's this kind of, it's not that it's not, it's not a very reputable place, but it's not a very reputable place. It's not where you want your loved one to pass away in the theater.
Sure.
And so they're trying to figure out what to do. They know he's not going to survive the trip to the White House, even though it's, just a few blocks away, but it's over cobblestone streets, and he's not going to make it. They can't get him there. He'll die on the way there. So they're really stuck with what to do with him. But they decide that they're going to have to move him out of the theater, that they cannot let the president die there in the theater.
Are they, so just by the way you're sort of describing this moment, are they multiple doctors, multiple ways of treatment? Are they looking for a place for the president to pass away with some dignity, or is there still some part of this that's like, we need to get him to a place where we can try to figure out if we can save him?
I think there may be a little bit of that hope, but mostly it's we need to get to a place where he can pass away with dignity.
That's got to be like, I mean, this whole story is surreal. This entire, like, surreal is such an understatement for things, but just like knowing that like this is an inevitability that's momentarily in front of us, but like our mission is to like find a place for this guy to die in peace and dignity. Like that's, I say mystifying, mind numbing. There's a innumerable amount of adjectives you could throw at it, but it's just this part of the story starts to really get to me because it's just like, I don't really deal well on a human level with like finalities I can't change, especially when they're negative ones. Like I have a really hard time. Like you could ask anybody I ever dated before I met my wife. I didn't do breakups well. I don't do goodbyes well. Like, there's a small part of me that every time Matt, has to, turn his season off at the Park Service, like I get really sad on his behalf. Like I don't deal well with like, and it's not negative when you turn your badge, but it just, I have strong feelings for you. I'm in your corner, Matt.
Thanks, man.
NPS needs to hire this guy. He's the best park ranger I've ever met in my life. Hire this dude. Anyway, but like, I can't imagine having to like feel human feelings. Like I feel them very deeply, but then also like being a professional, like a doctor, and like, we need to do certain things. There are certain tasks. And like this moment is just, it's chaos, but there's kind of like a sweet poetry to it. The amount of like people that care and like, and make this go the way it goes. And so I actually really like this part of the story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Leo, when he's assessing him and he finds there's already a blood clot forming at the back of the head, and Lincoln's breathing shallowly and inconsistently. And he discovers that if he pulls that blood clot out, that he breathes more easily. And so basically what he will keep doing for the rest of the night is removing that blood clot to relieve the pressure on the brain, and allow Lincoln to breathe more easily, which of course is prolonging his life and in some ways is suffering, but he's not conscious or aware. At some point in all of this chaos, the Fords end up in there, Laura Kern ends up in there, and she'll end up cradling Lincoln's head in her lap, in her dress, which she will then keep for the rest of her career, and with Lincoln's blood on it.
Which I always found ironic, considering how jealous of a woman Mary is. It's not Mary that's holding the president. Of course, she's in hysterics.
She's
and
in
would
hysterics.
Eventually be removed.
Yeah, Stanton says, "Get her out of here."
But that doesn't.
Well, that's across the street. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, she's hysterical there too, and supposedly she was not happy by her being there and holding Lincoln's head. And,
oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, this was not Mary's idea.
Who's holding the head? Is this Laura Keene?
Laura Keene, yeah.
Yeah, Laura Keene is
the actress.
So they're debating what to do with him, where to go. They decide they have to move him out of there. So they kind of come up with a makeshift litter and start, carrying him out, multiple soldiers carrying him down the stairs, which have this nice spiral to them. So I cannot imagine trying to keep a body flat and, that many.
Much less a 6'4" body.
That many.
Much less a 6'4" body.
Right.
Yeah.
A
And
lot of Lincoln to be moving down those stairs.
with people still going crazy and, they're not sure where they're going to take him. Across the street is the Petersons' house. And the Petersons were middle-class family. Mr. Peterson was a tailor. He had a tailor shop in the basement. Washington, D.C. during the war has this huge housing shortage. So a lot of people are renting out rooms to soldiers, to government workers who are in town. And the Petersons are no exception. They're renting out every available space that they have to tenants to make extra money.
So it's a boarding house, as it's often described, but it's not an actual boarding house. It's just they had rooms.
It's their private residence that they are renting out extra rooms.
What's the term? Subletting.
Oh, there you go.
Kind of, but people rent just a room and then they'd get fed as well. They'd have rights to food. And, but yeah, the Petersons, this is their personal home that they have, built and are helping pay for by renting out rooms, as well as their shop in the basement. And it's actually one of their tenants who hears the commotion and comes outside as they're bringing the president. He doesn't necessarily even know who it is that he's inviting. And he yells across, "Bring him in here," from the steps. And so they take Lincoln across the street into the Petersons' house and take him to the first bedroom they come to, which is down the long entrance hall to the back bedroom.
Now, what's this scene like out in the street real quick? Because when we see it in that Robert Redford movie I love to reference so much, I mean, it's like a packed street and they're like knocking on doors and people aren't answering. And it's kind of just like, somebody open a freaking door, and then this guy is like, "Hey, bring him here." So, I mean, is the street flooded with people at this point?
Yeah, well, so you've got 1,700 people in Ford's Theater who are now rushing to get out of there, and chaos, and there's confusion. People are saying the president's been shot, the president's dead. There's noise. It's.
I got to imagine there's a group of that a large portion of that group, I should say, that maybe the way we would think about like with mass shootings and stuff now, that just don't know what's happening and are just freaking out and like they just need to get out of the building.
Absolutely. I think all of that is going on. And so they bring Lincoln in, and of course he's 6'4", as we've discussed.
I keep making that dig because Matt corrected me like such a good guy.
He's too tall for the bed that they have available. So they have to lay him diagonally on the bed to get him to fit. And it's still just, you've got the doctors around him, you've got chaos. The word is getting, they're trying to find the vice president. They're trying to find, word is also breaking that Seward's been attacked and that he's dead, because there's a lot of confusion about that. And
William Seward not killed, but so slashed up, a lot of people think he's dead.
Half the Seward family is slashed up at this point.
True.
How quickly does Edwin Stanton show up? Because he's there relatively quickly.
Relatively quickly. I don't know the exact timing, but within, I'd say an hour, with probably more like half an hour, he's there. We're talking, when we think about DC today, we think about the full 10 square miles. And what you're talking about in the time of the Civil War is really a matter of blocks, so people can move and word moves pretty quickly. Stanton arrives and takes charge. He's not the next in line by any means. However, Johnson, as the story goes, is so drunk that they have to wait for him to sober up in order for him to take command.
That is unfortunate.
Yeah, I think Stanton says at one point, keep him away from the liquor.
Yeah.
I think, like, he's got a job to do in a minute. You need to get this boy ready.
Yeah. So, but Stanton really starts the process that night of, he brings in, as Secretary of War, he is used to giving orders. He's used to planning things. And so he immediately starts taking witness statements, eyewitness statements, and trying to figure out what happened and who did what. And, he has people arrested, just that dragnet. So the Fords, all of the actors, all of the stagehands, anybody that might have possibly had any connection or role in this. Of course, they figure out pretty quickly, because Booth didn't try and hide who he was, that it was Booth that shot him, and that. But then with the news coming in about Seward, and they have no idea how big this conspiracy is. They have no idea if Stanton's going to get attacked or if other members of the cabinet are going to be attacked. And so there is just lots of chaos and unknowns and just trying to figure out the narrative of what happened. Now, at the same time, Mary Lincoln is inconsolable. She is wailing, she's screaming, she's, grief struck. And as you said, Pat, Stanton can't deal with her. He has no compassion for her. He kicks her out of the room, has her taken to the front room, and, really discards her and does not bother to keep her informed. She is not with Lincoln from early in the evening until he passes away. They really just, Mary's an afterthought.
I was going to ask you, and I think I got a little bit of the vibe just in the way that you answered or explained that, but like, in your personal opinion, is Stanton getting her out of there more because he's incredibly business oriented and it's mission work time, or because he's just kind of a hard ass? It's like, I don't have time for this emotional crap. Get out of here.
I think, we don't know. I definitely get the impression that he wasn't an emotional person. He didn't have patience. Yeah, and you see, like, in the accounts of the time that, that she's this silly, hysterical woman,
Well, Stanton didn't have a lot of patience for anyone. I mean, he was well known in the War Department for biting off messengers' heads and things of that nature for any provocation.
Yeah, I mean, Stanton, his soft skills are not very good. His organizational skills are high. He's
a good description.
He's efficient, but yeah, he's not the person you want to have, sit with you while you're grieving. He's not going to do it. Now, if you need somebody to go and, hunt somebody down, sure. But yeah, he kicks Mary out, and she is pretty much treated as a nuisance by all of the men that are there surrounding Lincoln until he takes his last breath.
Is Mary present at 7:22 in the morning?
They don't allow her to see him again once they kick her out.
Really?
Yeah. So no, she's not with him.
That's super effed up.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, Mary gets a lot of grief. She's distraught. She ends up staying in the White House for months after he's assassinated. They basically have to drag her out of there. But really, it's kind of like the attitude is, yes, she's grieving, and it's like, really, still get over. Come on, lady, we've got to get on.
Oh, your husband died? Lots of people's husbands have died over the last 4 years.
Exactly, and so
cold. So cold.
So, yeah, Mary's not with Lincoln. Lincoln is surrounded by Stanton and Army officers and doctors and politicians.
Does Robert make it to his bedside?
I think so. I'm trying to remember. But even Robert took time for his mother, really. You know, they're all.
They've got a really bad relationship later on, too.
Yeah. He ends up having her committed to an asylum.
Which is where she spends the rest of her days, right?
No, she does get out eventually.
She does?
Yeah, but yeah, it's a tense. Their relationship never recovers.
I wish I could do that. Can you do that? You just put your mother in an asylum?
Not anymore.
Oh,
Not
damn.
anymore. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that to me is one of the biggest tragedies about this is just how Mary is treated there at the end, and that she's not allowed to be with Lincoln. That, you know, it's the fact that he's a father or a husband is eclipsed by his role as president, and Mary's grief is seen as inconvenient compared to the loss of the nations.
Two quick questions at this point in the story. One, were they giving hourly updates to the crowd that I'm sure did not disperse once they go into the Peterson's house? I'm sure that the crowd just kind of is like, so what's happening? So I imagine that there's a crowd out there. Are they giving like updates, kind of like what's going on?
That's my understanding, and that's, you know, Leo will write his memoir and talk about it, and he talks about giving updates to the crowd, that, you know, the president is still alive, or, you know, breathing shallowly, but, you know, they never really harbor any, you know, the crowd may be outside praying for a miracle, but the doctors never harbor any real belief that he's going to recover.
So the 14th turns into the 15th. The hourly updates have been coming. They're basically non-information. Like, it's the same. It's not looking good. We finally get to the moment just after 7 o'clock in the morning, and Lincoln passes away. And my next question is about Stanton, going back to him being sort of in charge of the scene, the moment, and weirdly, in some way, you could say the country. Like, he's not running the government function itself, but he's kind of running the show.
But he is kind of for, you know, 12 to 24 hours, he is running the government.
But we talked about Lincoln sort of being eclipsed as a husband and a father because he's kind of maybe in real time being seen as this more important on a bigger picture kind of way. So Stanton's got the line, right? Like, Lincoln dies and Stanton says the debatable, now he belongs to the ages or angels, depending on, you know, how you like to, who you're reading. That's our line, right? Depending on who you're reading.
Right.
But like, is one, what is the quote? What do we think what do we generally accept as the quote? And I like that because it's sort of in real time registering that this guy has a significance to us as Americans in this moment that's so much bigger than we can even fathom. And 150 years later, I think we're still discovering that impact. 160,
Yeah.
Pardon me.
Personally, I believe that it was probably more like the ages. The angels doesn't appear in print later until much later. You know, but did he even say that? I mean, they definitely were all aware of the significance and the gravitas of the moment. Like, the United States had never lost a president to assassination before that moment. This is a first. We've had other presidents die in office, but it's always been because of, you know, illness or old age. It's never been because of murder.
There was an attempt on Jackson, but that had been 50 years before at this point.
Yeah.
Was it an attempt or was it the duel?
No, there was an attempt on Andrew Jackson.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is not surprising considering.
You know, he's
right.
a polarizing figure.
Yeah. Even to this day.
Lincoln, you know, Lincoln's death, people, I mean, part of it's the Victorian habit or kind of understanding, but, you know, people were immediately like saving, this is what I was wearing when I found out or this is, the ribbon, I mean, the Petersons deal with this for a long time afterwards, with people breaking into the room where Lincoln dies and stealing pieces of the wallpaper or the curtains, or, they're already saving everything they have associated with Lincoln's death. They're preserving, and some of that's because the War Department swoops in and seizes the furniture from the box where Lincoln is shot, and they seize the Derringer, which, Booth had discarded, and, they're building a case already and hunting for Booth and the conspirators, but there's also just this, that was a very Victorian way of mourning, was to take lockets of hair or, pieces of a coat or
memento mori.
Exactly. And so they're saving from that beginning, Lincoln's jacket that he was wearing, his Brooks Brothers coat is in the Ford's Theater collection. And there are pieces of the lining that were cut out of it, almost immediately by people. It's still got the blood stains on it, but people were already, taking parts of it and taking pieces to remember. So there is definitely an awareness of the significance, and that people are going to remember this for the rest of their lives. And in a lot of ways, I think it's maybe the first national event like that. Today, when we were growing up, it was the JFK assassination. Every adult we knew could tell you exactly where they were, what they were doing when they heard. For our generation, it's 9/11. Right. We know, everybody who is old enough to remember knows exactly where they were and what they were doing, and will remember that for the rest of our lives. The Lincoln assassination was that way for people at that time. As word gets out, people are shocked. Some people don't believe it. They think it's, a Confederate rumor that's being sent around, but people remember where they were, what they were doing, when, and who told them or how they heard it. It's one of those markers in our cultural history. There's before and there's after. And, you've got to think about, this is at the end of those 4 years of hundreds of thousands of families that have already lost loved ones like this. And this one death has this power to really stun the nation in a way that hundreds of thousands of previous deaths had not.
What did Jefferson Davis say?
Davis actually does comment on the Lincoln assassination.
That's why this popped into my head, because he says basically something about I hate this a-hole, but didn't want that.
Yeah, he says something to the effect of, I never cared for Mr. Lincoln, but I can think of many other individuals who I would rather have seen this happen to.
It's that kind of shocking, where you're literally, we don't like to give Jeff Davis any sort of validation as an actual president or anything like that, but your contemporary on the other side of the war is holy crap, hate you, dude, but didn't want that. That's shocking.
Yeah, it was shocking. And, it's one of those things that there was a book that came out a few years ago that actually looks at the reactions of people at the time to the death, because now we think back and we think, well, everybody loved Lincoln and everybody immediately mourned him. And that wasn't the case. Some people still didn't like him. Some people argued that, God took him because, he wasn't going to be harsh enough in Reconstruction, or God took him because he had caused the Civil War. There were all these justifications, but, he was not universally loved in his lifetime by any means. And there were some people that were rejoicing in his death. As time goes on, you can't admit that to anybody. So, everybody kind of conveniently forgets that. But the reality is the nation was stunned that we had never experienced this kind of loss, that it becomes this, this unifier. And, you'd asked at the beginning about Ford's Theater. People don't know if the Ford brothers were involved. Booth was obviously friendly enough with them that they, that he got his mail there. But, they really have this cloud hanging over them for years. And, at first the War Department seizes the building to gather evidence and figure out what's going on. When it's finally, after a long time, months and months, turned back over to the Fords, and they start trying to put on a play again, they receive death threats. There are threats to burn the theater, and the War Department steps in and buys the building to keep the peace. Basically, they use government funds because it's the only way that they can see it to keep the peace, and it allows the Fords, who own other theaters, to move on and continue to own theaters up in Baltimore and other places. The Army doesn't need a theater, so they actually convert it to office space. Following the Civil War, there are all the claims. There's lots of paperwork. There's lots of creating jobs to employ veterans to process that paperwork. People have claims against the government for damages done. People have pension claims. And so
pension claim or property claims. Hope the Rebs didn't burn that.
Yeah.
You ain't getting it done.
Oil, prove it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, there's just tons of paperwork that is being created and processed and has to be stored. And so they build additional floors. They tear out the inside of the theater, which is not the first time that's happened. I mean, the building was initially built as a church.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
So the Fords had already remodeled, and then it had burned, and so they had rebuilt it. And so the theater that, Lincoln knew was a remodel of a remodel already. So the government had ripped out the insides of the building, put in 3 floors of office space. I'm blanking on the exact date, but that office space, over the next, 20 years, we've got paper growing and they're adding to the load. That office space actually ends up collapsing and killing employees. It was kind of a tragedy on a tragedy. And the thing that, people at the time said and that the site was cursed, well, it also happened on the day that Edwin Booth passed away. Like the day that this office space is rebuilt happens on the exact same day as Edwin Booth dies. And so, people draw connections between that and, it's one of those kind of crazier than fiction. You couldn't, if you had written that into a story, people would be like, oh, that's too corny. That wouldn't happen. But
too much.
That's like, it's like when you tie things together, like Surrender Day and DMX dying on the same day. Coincidence. Just kidding.
Exactly. So, the building collapses. It's, I believe, like 18 clerks die in the collapse.
Yeah, it's quite tragic. I'm so glad that you brought this up, Jana, because it is a part of the Ford Theater itself, the structures story that we don't hear about.
And so it'll, eventually they'll, tear out the insides again and just turn it into a warehouse. And it will sit that way for the next 30, 40 years. And the push to start restoring the theater really starts in the 20s and 30s, that you start getting these proposals for them to rebuild the theater, to recreate what it was like so that people could understand what happened to Lincoln and the assassination. People keep coming to the site, even when it's a warehouse and not open to the public, so much so that they finally start storing the artifacts associated with the trial and with the assassination there, and kind of create a little mini museum.
Was that being operated by the War Department then?
Yeah, by the government. You know, it's
Wow.
kind of weird thing. And, you know, with World War II and the Great Depression, kind of the talk of rebuilding, it dies down. So it's not until the late 1950s, 1960s that they finally get the funding and start rebuilding the theater inside to look like it did when Lincoln was there and was assassinated. And they're able to do that because of all of the photographs that were taken following the assassination. I mean, they take photos of just about every single angle that there is of the theater to try and understand what happens. So there's a lot of documentation and evidence. There's all of the, you know, the interviews that were done. There's the trial records. Like, they've got a ton of information to work with about the theater and what happens there to rebuild things. Peterson House by this time has already been purchased by the government and established as a National Historic Site. That happens much earlier. It's preserved, and it's, you know, it's another interesting story is the house stays in the family until it's sold to the government. When the Petersons die, though, their children hold basically an estate sale. And they sell just about everything that they can rip out of the house, from the light fixtures to wallpaper to you name it, you know, doorknobs, and they sell them as from the house where Lincoln died. Like,
they must have made a mint.
They did. They made quite a bit of money from that, you know, and that's like the 1870s, 1880s that they're selling this and making money. But the house stays in the family until they sell it to the government in the early 20th century. And then it's preserved as and known as the house where Lincoln died. Ford's Theater itself gets rebuilt in the 60s. And while they're in the process of rebuilding, initially the plan is just to rebuild the theater and have it serve as a museum. There's no talk about putting plays on there again. But I think there are a couple things that happen as it's being rebuilt and people are talking about it. I think our understanding of how we grieve and what is really honoring somebody who's passed away means, you know, when Lincoln dies, people feel that the best way to honor him would be to never hold a play in that space again. That, you know, time should freeze, that should stay still, that there should never be a comedy or even a drama or anything in that space. But by the time you're at the centennial and it's 100 years later, there's a different understanding of what it means to honor Lincoln. And the thought is that instead of freezing time, we should honor his love of the arts and honor his love of the theater by making this not just a sterile museum, but a living theater. And so the Ford's Theater Society is formed to do that, to put on plays in the theater. The building itself is part of the National Park System. It's maintained and operated by the National Park Service, but there is the Friends group, the Ford's Theater Society, that is responsible for putting on plays, and they still do that. They're still part of that. Part of the way that, you know, when I first was there and trying to make sense of, like, how do we get from, you know, wanting to burn down the building to having plays and comedies in this building. What made sense to me was thinking back to 9/11, and which was a Tuesday when the planes hit. And I remember there was great debate at Saturday Night Live about whether or not they should do a show that week.
Right. Yeah, I remember this.
And they struggled with it. And part of them were like, nope, we can't do it. We can't go on. We've lost people. We've lost friends. We're grieving as a nation. And other folks argued. And what they eventually decided was, we have to do a show tonight. That this act was more than just an act on those, an attack on those buildings or those symbols. This was an attempt to destroy us as a nation. And if we stop, if we don't do a show, we allow them to win. We allow them to change us as who we are. And I think of having plays at Ford's Theater is kind of the same way. The attack wasn't just an attack on Lincoln. It was an attempt to decapitate the government, to kill the United States, something the South had been trying to do for 4 years at that point, to destroy us. And while at the time the feeling was we can't possibly do this anymore, by 100 years later, I think we needed to show that not only, and what was honoring Lincoln was not just that we survive, but we continue to thrive.
Right.
We continue to produce art, we continue to enjoy, and we continue as a community, as a people, as a nation, and that his sacrifice was not in vain, that we endure, and that we will not allow this hateful act to destroy us.
I love this sentiment entirely. I've had goosebumps like the last minute and a half listening to this because I vividly remember that Tuesday morning. And I was thinking about just when you talked about, as soon as you brought up Saturday Night Live, I started to think about all the ways that I related and connected to this. And I'm a big baseball guy. I make baseball timely sports jokes all the time. But one of the things I think that I'll never forget, and as a Yankees fan, the only part of me that doesn't the only negative in this moment is that it wasn't the Yankees. It was the New York Mets. But when baseball came back and Mike Piazza jacked this game-winning walk-off home run in New York, in the first game back after baseball resumed, it was the power of the show must go on. The idea we must go on was so powerful. And I was 15 rather at that time. And even as a teenager, I was blown away by this, I'm, another baseball analogy. I'm thinking about James Earl Jones and Field of Dreams talking about the American engine, the steamroller. It just kind of goes on. And that was my first example of my first experience of it. But a few years back, I had the privilege and honor of meeting a Normandy veteran who landed on Juno Beach. And I asked him if he'd ever made it back there. Cause I don't really know what to ask veterans of great experiences like this. I have all these questions that I could ask them in this moment among the three of us, but I get in front of one of them and I'm like Wayne's World, I'm not worthy. It's this weird thing I do, but I had a pretty good chat with this guy and I asked him just casually, did you ever make it back to Normandy? Later in life. And he said he's been back a couple of times. And he actually told me a wild experience for him. He said the first time he went back there was families sitting on the beach, right? Where him and his buddies, his comrades in arms, literally landed, fought, and died, the worst moments of humanity. And there's kids building sandcastles and there's people sunbathing and playing in the ocean. And he told me, he's at first that really pissed him off. He felt it was disrespectful to all of the men and women that had supported this effort, that had suffered and died and all these things like that. And then he said the second time he went back there, he had, in the between times, really understood he didn't know anything about Normandy other than he landed there and fought. But he realized in time that was already a kind of vacation spot.
Right. And
honestly, that family being there 20, 30 years after he initially landed there was the moment, was life going on. It was the people, humanity going on after obviously Hitler's forces had occupied major portions of France and obviously the Atlantic Wall and things like that. But as you were speaking, I was humanity really like the good parts of humanity. These are the things that keep me, with hope, to be optimistic and opine for a minute for the future. Is like every time we have these negative moments, in hindsight, they almost appear darkest before the dawn in a way, because we find a way to pick up and move on. And we're coming up on 20 years since the World Trade Center, Pentagon, Shanksville attacks and plane crash. And it's an interesting journey moving on. And it's interesting to think about Ford's Theater kind of having 100 years to come to grips with this. And I didn't realize that it had been such a long layover. Like for some reason, I thought that they were maybe doing plays a year, 5 years after this. I didn't realize that it was such a...
It was like 103 years. I think it was 1968 when they held the first performance in that space again.
What was the first play? Do you know? It wasn't Our American Cousin, was it?
No, it was not.
Bad taste.
It eventually, I believe, do a reading of it at least. I'm trying to remember. It was a gala, actually, to mark the opening. With various performers. And yeah, I'm trying to remember because I was at Ford's when the centennial of the opening and looking into that and trying to understand, that I can't imagine the pressure of like putting on that first show, feeling of like, we can't screw this up.
Has Our American Cousin been performed on the stage at Ford's Theater since it reopened?
I believe it has, but maybe not performed. I think they did a reading of it.
It's like a reading of it.
The thing is, it's not that funny a play.
No, it's really not. Like, it's stupid. No, I'll say it. I don't care.
Yeah.
The writers aren't offended.
They're dead. They don't care.
That was the joke. Yeah. I don't care.
I've actually seen a play at Ford's Theater.
You have?
Yeah.
Nice.
And it's a wonderful setup. It's a very small playhouse even to this day. And Jana mentioned earlier that there's 1,700 people trying to get out of Ford's, but that's way beyond the fire marshal for the modern theater.
Yeah, no, it's like a third of that now allowed.
Right.
So
it's a wonderful setup. They don't let folks into the Lincoln booth.
Right, the booth.
Yeah, that's specific.
We should say the box. We shouldn't call it the booth.
Yeah, good point.
The box, nobody has watched a play. That has been from the box since it's reopened.
Which I think is appropriate.
When you were there, Matt, did you have a hard time putting your eyes on the stage, knowing sort of the vibe and the moment in history? And like you're obviously staring at the box Lincoln was sitting in, right?
I was, yeah.
So how hard was it to keep your eyes on the stage? My
first experience at Ford's Theater was actually after the major renovation that occurred in the 2000s. I was working in D.C. at the time for American Battlefield Protection Program for Park Service. And once the renovation occurred, the first event they had there was 3 Lincoln historians talking about the assassination and the flight. So Swanson was there. I think Kaufman was there. But the 3 of them on stage, and I went to see that. And, of course, I'm looking at the box the whole time. But when I went to the play and took my wife to the play, initially it was difficult to focus on the stage. I did kind of keep drifting, but it was a very good performance. Of course, it's a wonderful theater experience, and they really do draw you in nicely for the performance that was going on. But no, I agree. Initially, you are very aware of where you are at.
I am your typical, like, I grew up in this area kind of guy, so I take all the touristy things for granted, and I haven't done a ton of them. I've only been to Ford's Theater one time in person, and I went as a much younger. I was like 20 maybe when I went there. I'll be 35 this year, but I wasn't as mature or disciplined, and so I didn't think all of the deepest thoughts like I do now. But when I went there, the one thing I couldn't escape from, and I think about it and I laugh because I was thinking it like a petulant teenager, even though I was 20. I just had that mentality still. Ask my wife, I might still have it. But all I thought about was there's no way he broke his leg jumping from this box. Like, I could do that. And like I said it in the big episode, like I'm not implying that Booth jumped and it didn't didn't hurt because it's like they said there's two types of experiences we have when we jump. We either jump and everything's good, or we jump and it's like, my knees, my back, like something hurt. He probably had that experience, but all I could think was like, I could make that.
Well, the explanation was the catching the spur on that he was an athletic guy. He was used to doing his own stunts and during plays, but it was that getting off balance, from Rathbone trying to grab him as he's jumping. That was what, if he broke his leg, then that was why. But again, I would think that if he had broken his leg that badly, people would have noticed him limping out the door.
Yeah, we agree. I was just going to say, Jana, this has been fantastic. You've really dove deep with us into the details of Ford's Theater, the events of April 14th, April 15th, and the Peterson House. And you brought in that extra information in regards to the use of the theater as a facility for the War Department and the additional tragedy that occurs there. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming in, if you will, and joining us on this call for this information.
Yeah, I absolutely want to chime in on that. I just want to say thank you again, because you're the first person that's ever given me goosebumps on this show. Like you illustrated very poetically some very human and powerful moments and experiences, and I'm blown away, and I'm super happy that you said yes to coming on the show to talk about your time at Ford's Theater and what that story sort of like is in your interpretation of it. That's sort of what we like to do here, is have different people telling stories, because we are big fans of the concept of not every teacher is the teacher for you. So as many people that can talk about a subject as possible, like it's good. Somebody might key on it in a different way. So I really immensely enjoyed listening to you tonight. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm glad I was able to remember enough to tell the story. It's been a few years, so.
Well, if you guys are looking for Matt and Jana to tell you a story they're a little more fresher on, as everybody continues to follow the rules with this pandemic, wear your masks, get your shots, not like shots like shots, but like get your vaccine shots, keep your distance and all that. But as soon as these national parks start opening up and doing programming, you guys got to get out and see Jana and Matt at Monocacy National Battlefield, where they tell one of my favorite Civil War stories, Battle of Monocacy Junction, 1864, the battle that saved Washington. Though there's some guys at Harper's Ferry that want to argue with you guys about that. If you want to know more, go see them this summer. And then if you want to hear more about the Lincoln assassination from the History Things podcast, stay tuned, because coming up in a couple weeks, we're going to sit down with Kobe Treadway again, the education coordinator at the Surratt House Museum out in Clinton, Maryland. He's going to get into the overall aftermath. We're going to get into the trial of the conspirators. So, Jana, if you love some fun stuff like that and you want to talk about it, let us know. We can get you back on here. But we're very excited that we've had some really great minds approaching the topic of the Lincoln assassination, and the Ford's Theater focus was just so cool. I had so much fun. I can't contain myself. So stick around. There's some really cool stuff coming up from the History Things podcast. Obviously, we're getting towards the end of the first half of season 2. So we'll have an administrative episode in a couple months where we'll kind of tell you about our plans for down the road. Because, Matt and I are always scheming. We got books coming out from Matt Borders. Maybe someday I'll put out a book that I've been working on forever, but no news on that front. But we got big stuff coming up as far as from the field videos. Monocacy's anniversary is coming up this summer, so we'll probably tell you some stories from the field. Join us for that, please, Jana. Come hang out with us and be nerdy out in the grass and the wheat that is your battlefield. But if you guys want to follow along on our social medias, follow us at the History Things Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. You can check me out on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at History Things with Pat. You can follow Matt on Instagram at Matt Borders Books. Jana, do you do any public social media or just direct people to see you at the site once it's open?
Just see us at Monocacy National Battlefield. We've got Facebook and Instagram for that, so we appreciate follows on there.
Absolutely, and support them in person too. It's probably the best low-key, small Civil War site you're ever going to find anywhere in this country. It's awesome, and I'm a huge fan, and I'm totally biased because I'm from this area, but I love it, love it, love it, love it. Thank you guys for spending some time with us on the History Things podcast. This has been a really great bonus edition to the show. Thanks for being our guest today, Jana. We'll see you all next time for our follow-up for Kobe Treadway for the History Things podcast. I'm your host, Pat McGuire. This has been your co-host, Matt Borders. We will see you all later.
Have a good night.
You've been listening to the History Things podcast. Follow the guys on Facebook and Instagram at the History Things podcast for all the latest news and exclusives. Make sure to also follow Pat and Matt on their social medias at History Things with Pat and at Matt Borders Books. Have a question, comment, or compliment for the show? Send us an email at historythingspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show.